You want to know what real ambition looks like, David? It's walking away from someone who never deserved you in the first place. Those words came out of my mouth with a calmness that surprised even me. For days ago, I would have begged him to reconsider. For days ago, I would have promised to change, to be better, to somehow become the woman he thought he needed. But today? Today, I'm looking at my ex-husband through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office while his secretary, his new girlfriend, sits frozen at her desk behind him, and I'm thinking about karma. You know how people say karma isn't real? That good things happen to bad people and life isn't fair? I used to believe that too. I spent 6 years believing that. But let me tell you something about the universe. It keeps receipts. And when it decides to settle accounts, it doesn't mess around. Hey everyone, I hope you're having an amazing day wherever you're watching from. The weather here in Atlanta is beautiful, which feels fitting for what I'm about to share with you. My name is Amara Johnson, and this is the story of how I went from being told I wasn't ambitious enough on a Tuesday to becoming worth $267 million by Saturday. Yes, you heard that right. $267 million. If you're thinking this sounds too good to be true, stick around. I promise you this story will leave you believing in justice again. And if it does, please hit that like button and subscribe because I've got a feeling you're going to want to hear every single detail of what happens when the universe decides to make things right. But let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand exactly who I was before I became who I am now. 3 months ago, I was 26 years old, and I believed in marriage the way some people believe in religion. I believed that when you love someone, you sacrifice for them. I believed that building someone else's dreams was the same as building your own. I believed that being a good wife meant making your husband's life easier, smoother, better in every possible way. I believed in putting my partner first, even when it meant putting myself last. I believed in the power of unconditional love, in standing by your person through thick and thin. I believed that if you gave someone everything, your time, your energy, your unwavering support, they would value that gift and treasure you for it. Most of all, I believed that David Mitchell loved me the way I loved him. Looking back now, I can see how naive that was. But when you're in it, when you're living it day by day, those beliefs feel like truths. They feel like the foundation of everything good in your life. David and I met during my senior year at Georgia State. I was studying business administration, working 2 part-time jobs to pay for school, and somehow still maintaining a 3.8 GPA. He was in law school, brilliant and driven, and absolutely convinced he was going to change the world. When he looked at me with those intense blue eyes and told me I was the most incredible woman he'd ever met, I felt like I could fly. We got married 6 months after I graduated. I was 21, he was 24, and we had this whole beautiful plan mapped out. He would finish law school and start building his career while I established myself in business. We would support each other's dreams, build something amazing together, and create the kind of partnership that other couples would admire. For exactly 3 weeks, that plan felt real. Then David's student loans came due. His internship at the law firm barely covered his expenses, and he was stressed about money constantly. He would come home exhausted and frustrated, talking about his classmates whose families were paying for everything while he worked twice as hard just to stay afloat. That's when I made the first sacrifice. It seemed small at the time, logical even. I had been planning to pursue my MBA, but instead I took a full-time position as an administrative coordinator at a mid-sized marketing firm. The salary was decent, and it meant David could focus on his studies without the crushing weight of immediate financial pressure. It's just temporary, I told myself. Once he's established, I can go back to school. David was grateful. He held me close that night and whispered about how lucky he was to have me, how I was investing in our future together. He promised that once he was making partner money, he would support my dreams the same way I was supporting his. I held on to that promise like it was oxygen. The second sacrifice came during his second year when his grades started slipping. He was working at the law firm 20 hours a week on top of his full course load, and he was burning out. So I picked up the slack at home. I took over all the household responsibilities: cooking, cleaning, grocery shopping, paying bills, managing our social calendar. I wanted our home to be his sanctuary, the place where he could rest and recharge. "You're amazing," he would say when he came home to dinner already prepared and laundry already done. "I don't know how you do it all." I did it because I loved him. I did it because I believed we were building something together. The third sacrifice was harder to rationalize, but somehow I managed it. During his final year of law school, David's study group started meeting at our apartment 3 nights a week. These were the smart kids, the ones from families with money and connections. Their conversations about internships at prestigious firms and family vacation homes made me acutely aware of how different my background was from theirs. David started making comments about how I dressed, how I spoke, how I presented myself when his classmates were around. Nothing harsh, just gentle suggestions about how I could polish my image to better fit into his professional world. So I used my clothing budget to buy business-appropriate outfits that looked expensive even when they weren't. I practiced speaking more precisely, eliminating any trace of the Southern accent I'd grown up with. I learned about wine and art and the kinds of cultural references that would make me sound educated at networking events. I transformed myself into the woman David needed me to be. And it worked. His classmates accepted me, their wives and girlfriends included me in their social circles, and David beamed with pride when people complimented him on his impressive partner. "See," he said after a particularly successful law firm mixer where I'd charmed 2 senior partners. "This is what I mean about ambition. You can be anything you want to be when you put your mind to it." Except I wasn't becoming anything I wanted to be. I was becoming what he wanted me to be. But the distinction felt unimportant then, lost in the rush of his approval and the promise of our shared future. David graduated summa cum laude and landed a position at Hartwell, Morrison and Associates, one of Atlanta's most prestigious law firms. His starting salary was more money than I'd ever imagined having, and suddenly our life felt full of possibility. That's when I made the biggest sacrifice of all. "I think you should quit your job," David said over dinner at an expensive restaurant to celebrate his first week at the firm. "I'm making enough to support us both, and honestly, I need you available. There are going to be a lot of client dinners, firm events, networking opportunities. Having you free to accompany me will be crucial for my career advancement." The logical part of my brain knew this was a mistake. I had worked so hard to establish myself at the marketing firm. My supervisor had been hinting about a promotion to account manager. I loved the work, loved the feeling of accomplishment that came from managing successful campaigns and building client relationships. But David made such a compelling case. He talked about how the wives of senior partners were all dedicated to supporting their husbands' careers. He showed me articles about power couples where the woman's role was managing their social and domestic life, while the man focused on professional success. He painted a picture of the life we could have: a beautiful home, financial security, status in Atlanta's legal community. "This is our chance to really build something," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I know you have dreams too, and we'll get there. But right now, this is how we set ourselves up for the future where you can do anything you want." So I quit my job. I told myself it was a strategic decision, an investment in our shared future. I told myself that supporting David's career was supporting our partnership. For the first year, it felt like the right choice. David was thriving at the firm, bringing home stories about important cases and impressed senior partners. We moved to a beautiful apartment in Buckhead, started attending charity galas and country club events. I threw dinner parties that became the talk of David's professional circle, planned weekend getaways that allowed him to network with colleagues in relaxed settings. I was good at it. Really good. Other associates' wives came to me for advice about navigating firm politics and social expectations. Senior partners' wives welcomed me into their charitable organizations and social committees. I felt like I was contributing to something important, even if it wasn't exactly what I had planned for my life. But somewhere in the second year, things started to shift. David's confidence grew along with his success, but that confidence started to feel less like partnership and more like ownership. He began making decisions about our social calendar without consulting me. He would commit us to events and then casually mention them to me the day before, expecting me to rearrange my plans accordingly. When I expressed frustration about the lack of communication, he would remind me that his work was demanding and unpredictable. "This is just how it is at this level," he would say. "I need to be able to focus on the law without worrying about calendar management." The conversations about my future, about pursuing my own dreams once we were established, became less frequent and then stopped altogether. When I brought up the possibility of going back to school or finding part-time work, David would point out how much the firm events and social obligations required, how other partners' wives were full-time dedicated to supporting their husbands' careers. "Maybe once I make partner," he would say, "then things will be more stable and predictable." Partner track was 7 years minimum. I was 24 years old, and he was asking me to put my life on hold for 7 more years. But I loved him. I believed in us. I believed that sacrifice was what love looked like, and that eventually my turn would come. I had no idea that while I was sacrificing everything for our future, David was already planning a completely different future, one that didn't include me at all. The thing about being the perfect wife is that it becomes your entire identity without you realizing it. I wasn't Amara Johnson anymore. I was David Mitchell's wife. And honestly, for a while, that felt like enough. Let me tell you about the version of myself I created for David, because understanding her is crucial to understanding how completely I lost myself in that marriage. I became the woman who could plan a dinner party for 12 with 48 hours notice and make it look effortless. I memorized the names and interests of every partner's spouse at Hartwell, Morrison, and Associates. I knew which wines paired with which meals, which charities were considered prestigious, and exactly how to dress for every occasion from casual firm barbecues to black tie fundraisers. I woke up at 5:30 every morning to have coffee ready when David came downstairs at 6:15. I laid out his clothes the night before, not because he asked me to, but because I knew it made his mornings smoother. I handled every aspect of our domestic life so seamlessly that David never had to think about grocery shopping, bill paying, or household maintenance. More than that, I became his emotional support system and career strategist. When he was frustrated with a case, I listened for hours and helped him work through legal strategies. When he was nervous about presentations, I helped him practice until he felt confident. When he was competing for assignments, I researched the clients and helped him prepare talking points that would impress the partners. I genuinely believed I was being a good partner. I thought this was what marriage looked like, two people working together towards shared goals, with each person contributing their strengths to build something neither could achieve alone. My strength, apparently, was making David's life perfect so he could focus on his career. The irony is that I was incredibly good at it. The organizational skills, the social intelligence, the ability to manage complex logistics and relationships, these were exactly the skills that would have made me successful in business. But instead of using them to build my own career, I used them to build his. David's colleagues constantly praised him for having such an impressive wife. "You're so lucky," they would tell him at firm events. "Amara makes this look easy." And David would smile and agree, accepting the compliments as if my competence reflected his good judgment rather than my hard work. But here's what I didn't see at the time: David wasn't just accepting those compliments. He was starting to believe he deserved them. That my dedication to his success was somehow proof of his inherent worth rather than evidence of my love and sacrifice. The first crack in my perfect wife facade came during David's third year at the firm. We were at the annual partners retreat in Savannah, and I was doing what I always did, charming clients, remembering personal details about everyone's families, making sure David looked good by association. I was talking with Margaret Hartwell, the founding partner's wife, about her daughter's upcoming wedding when she said something that stopped me cold. You know, dear, you're wasted as just a wife. You have more social and organizational talent than half the event coordinators we've hired for firm functions. Have you ever considered starting your own business? The question hit me like a physical shock. When was the last time someone had asked me about my own ambitions? When was the last time I had even thought about my own ambitions? Oh, I'm perfectly happy supporting David's career, I heard myself say, the response automatic after years of practice. Margaret studied me with sharp eyes. I'm sure you are. But happiness and fulfillment aren't always the same thing, are they? That conversation haunted me for weeks. I found myself lying awake at night thinking about the marketing career I had abandoned, the MBA I had deferred indefinitely, the dreams I had set aside so completely that I could barely remember what they felt like. I tried talking to David about it. I chose my moment carefully, a quiet Sunday morning when he was relaxed and we had time to really discuss things. I've been thinking about maybe taking some business classes, I said carefully. Just part-time, something I could do around your schedule. David looked up from his newspaper with a frown. Why would you want to do that? You're already busy with the charity work and firm events. I know, but I miss using my brain in that way. I miss the challenge of business strategy and… Amara, you use your brain constantly. The way you managed the Morrison anniversary party last month was brilliant. Everyone's still talking about it. That's not the same thing, David. I'm talking about building something of my own. His frown deepened. Is this about money? Because we're doing fine financially. You don't need to work. It's not about money. It's about having something that's mine. But we're a team. What we're building together is yours too. The conversation went in circles. David couldn't understand why I would want to complicate our life when everything was going so well. And I couldn't explain the growing emptiness I felt without sounding ungrateful for everything we had built. That's when I met Rebecca Chin. Rebecca was the new associate David's firm had hired straight from Harvard Law. She was brilliant, ambitious, and exactly the kind of woman I had planned to become before I decided to become David's wife instead. The firm was throwing a welcome party for the new associates, and I was in my usual role, hostess, conversation facilitator, charm offensive coordinator. Rebecca and I ended up talking by the bar while David networked across the room. So, what do you do? Rebecca asked, and I gave my standard response about supporting David's career and managing our social obligations. Rebecca listened politely, then said, That's lovely, but what do you do for you? The question was so direct it caught me off guard. I'm sorry. What are your goals? Your interests? What gets you excited to wake up in the morning besides making coffee for your husband? I stared at her, realizing I didn't have an answer. When had I stopped having goals that were separate from David's goals? When had I stopped having interests that weren't related to supporting his career? I used to want to start my own marketing consultancy, I heard myself say. I had this whole plan about helping small businesses develop their brand strategies. Rebecca's eyes lit up. That sounds amazing. Are you still working on that? No, David's career is very demanding right now. Maybe later. Later when? When he makes partner. When things are more stable. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. And when is that? For more years, probably. So you're putting your dreams on hold for 4 more years. Hearing it stated so plainly made it sound insane. It's not like that. We're building something together. Are you? Or are you building something for him while your own dreams collect dust? That conversation planted a seed that I tried desperately to ignore. But Rebecca had a way of asking questions that forced me to examine my life honestly. Over the next few months, she and I became friends, and she became the voice in my head that questioned everything I had accepted as normal. Why don't you start small? She suggested during one of our coffee meetings. Freelance marketing work. Something you can do from home on your own schedule. David wouldn't like that. He needs me available for firm events. How many firm events are there really? 2 a month? 3. Well, it's not just the events. It's everything else. Like what? When I tried to list everything I did that was supposedly essential to David's career, it sounded ridiculous even to me. David was a grown man. He could lay out his own clothes and manage his own calendar. But the idea of changing our arrangement felt impossible. David had grown accustomed to the level of support I provided. Our entire relationship was built on the foundation of me facilitating his success. What would we be without that? The answer to that question came sooner than I expected. It was a Thursday evening in September. David had been working late all week on a big case, and I had barely seen him except for the brief moments when he came home to shower and change clothes. I had dinner waiting when he finally walked through the door at 9:30. "How did the deposition go?" I asked, like I always did. David collapsed into his chair and rubbed his temples. "Brutal. The opposing counsel is sharp. Really sharp." "But you're sharper," I said, serving him the salmon I had kept warm for 2 hours. "I don't know about that. She's this hotshot from Morrison's corporate division. Sandra Phillips. She's been practicing for 15 years, and she knows corporate law inside and out." I noticed the way he said her name. There was something in his voice, respect, but also something else. Something that made me pay attention. "Is she the lead on their side?" "Yeah, and she's good. Really good. I've never worked opposite someone with her level of expertise." Over the next few weeks, Sandra Phillips became a regular topic of conversation. David would come home full of stories about her legal strategies, her courtroom presence, her brilliant cross-examinations. He spoke about her with an admiration that bordered on awe. "She's everything I want to be as a lawyer," he said one evening. "Confident, prepared, absolutely fearless in court." "You're all of those things too," I said. "Not like her. She has this way of commanding respect the moment she walks into a room. People listen when she talks." I felt a strange twist in my stomach. "People listen when you talk too, David. It's different with her. She's built something incredible. Her own practice, her own reputation, her own success. She doesn't need anyone or anything except her own talent." The way he emphasized her own felt like a criticism of everything I represented. I was the opposite of Sandra Phillips. I hadn't built anything on my own. I needed David for my identity, my purpose, my financial security. The case stretched on for months, and David's obsession with Sandra Phillips grew. He would work late into the night preparing for the next day's proceedings. He would wake up early to review case law and refine his arguments. He brought an intensity to his work that I had never seen before. "She's making me better," he said one morning over coffee. "I have to be at the top of my game just to keep up with her." I wanted to be happy for him. Professional challenges were supposed to be good for career growth. But something about the way David talked about Sandra made me deeply uncomfortable. The discomfort turned to real concern the night I found him on the phone with her at 11 o'clock. I had gone to bed early with a headache, but I woke up around 11 to get some water. David was in his study with the door closed, but I could hear his voice through the wall. He was laughing, really laughing, the way he used to laugh with me when we first started dating. "No, you're absolutely right," he was saying. "I never thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right." I stood in the hallway listening to him talk to another woman with more animation and enthusiasm than he had shown me in months. They were supposedly discussing case strategy, but the conversation felt intimate in a way that had nothing to do with legal work. When David finally came to bed at midnight, I pretended to be asleep. He slid into bed carefully, trying not to wake me, and I heard him whisper, "Amara." I didn't respond. I lay there in the dark thinking about the difference between the voice he used with Sandra Phillips and the voice he used with me. With her, he sounded excited, energized, alive. With me, he sounded polite and distant, like we were pleasant roommates rather than husband and wife. That's when I knew something had fundamentally shifted. But I told myself it was just the stress of the case. I told myself that once the trial was over, things would go back to normal. I had no idea that normal was never coming back. The case wrapped up in January with a settlement that David described as a complete victory. He came home that night carrying champagne and flowers, more excited than I had seen him in years. "Sandra said I was brilliant today," he announced as he opened the champagne. "She said I argued circles around their corporate team," Sandra said. Not opposing counsel said, or the other side acknowledged. Sandra said, "That's wonderful, I managed. I'm so proud of you." We celebrated that night like we were newlyweds again. David was attentive and affectionate in a way he hadn't been in months. He told me about the settlement terms, praised my support throughout the stressful case, and made love to me with an intensity that felt both familiar and foreign. Lying in his arms afterward, I felt hopeful. Maybe the case ending would mean David's attention would return to our relationship. Maybe we could finally have those conversations about my own goals and dreams that I had been putting off. But the next morning, I discovered exactly how wrong I was. David was in the shower when his phone buzzed with a text message. The phone was sitting on his nightstand, and the message preview appeared on the lock screen. "Sandra, last night was incredible. When can I see you again?" I stared at those words until they burned into my retinas. Last night was incredible. When can I see you again? Last night. When David had been celebrating with me. When he had been making love to me. My hands were shaking as I set the phone back down exactly where I had found it. I heard the shower turn off and forced myself to walk calmly to the kitchen to start coffee, like every other morning. When David came downstairs 20 minutes later, he looked exactly the same as always. Same smile, same "good morning, beautiful," same kiss on my cheek as he reached for his coffee cup. But everything had changed. The perfect wife I had spent 5 years becoming was married to a man who was cheating on her with the brilliant, independent, successful woman he wished she could be. And I was too terrified to confront him about it because I knew what that conversation would reveal, that I had sacrificed everything to become someone he no longer wanted. The woman he wanted was Sandra Phillips. The woman he was stuck with was me. The text message from Sandra should have been my wake-up call. It should have been the moment I confronted David and demanded the truth. But fear is a powerful thing, and I was terrified of what that truth might cost me. So instead of confronting him, I did what I had been trained to do for 5 years. I made his life easier and hoped that would be enough to save our marriage. I told myself that maybe I had misunderstood the message. Maybe last night was incredible referred to the legal victory, not anything personal. Maybe Sandra was just being friendly, maybe David hadn't responded, maybe I was reading too much into 13 words on a phone screen. But deep down, I knew better. The way David had been talking about Sandra for months, the late-night phone calls, the sudden energy and excitement in his voice when he discussed their case, these weren't the signs of a professional relationship. Still, I chose denial over confrontation because confrontation felt like the end of everything I had built my identity around. Instead, I doubled down on being the perfect wife. I planned elaborate weekend getaways to romantic destinations. I surprised David with his favorite meals and tickets to events I knew he would enjoy. I made our home even more beautiful, our social life even more impressive, our relationship even more comfortable for him. For a few weeks, it seemed to work. David was attentive and affectionate. He complimented my cooking, praised my party planning skills, and made an effort to spend quality time together. I convinced myself that whatever had been happening with Sandra was over now that their case was finished. Then David came home with news that shattered my carefully constructed hope. "I have something amazing to tell you," he said, practically bouncing with excitement as he walked through the door on a Friday evening in February. "Remember how I've been talking about wanting to start my own practice eventually?" My stomach dropped, but I managed to smile. "Of course." "Well, Sandra and I have been discussing it, and we think this might be the perfect time." She's ready to leave Morrison's corporate division, and I'm ready to move beyond associate work. We want to start a boutique firm together. The words hit me like a physical blow. Sandra and I. We want to start. Together. A partnership? I managed to ask. Exactly. We complement each other perfectly, her corporate expertise and my litigation background. We've already started putting together a business plan. When did you start putting together a business plan? We've been talking about it for weeks. I wanted to make sure it was really viable before I mentioned it to you. Weeks. They had been planning their future together for weeks while I was planning romantic getaways to save our marriage. David, starting a law firm is a huge financial risk. We'd need significant capital and… That's the beautiful part, he interrupted, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. We've run the numbers, and we think we can get started with about $200,000 in initial investment. That would cover office space, equipment, initial marketing, and operating expenses for the first year. $200,000. We had exactly $230,000 in our joint savings account, money that included my entire inheritance from my grandmother's estate. You want to use our savings, I said quietly. Our savings, a small business loan, maybe some investor capital. Amara, this is our chance to build something incredible. Sandra has clients ready to follow her from Morrison's. I have contacts from Hartwell who would send us referral business. We could be making partner-level money within 2 years. Our chance. But Sandra would be his partner in this new venture, not me. Have you thought about what this means for us? I asked. You'd be working with Sandra every day, building a business together. Which is exactly why it's going to be successful. We work incredibly well together. The way he said it made my chest tight. David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. He must have heard something in my voice because his expression grew cautious. What is it? Are you having an affair with Sandra? The question hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. David's face went through a series of expressions, surprise, guilt, defensiveness, before settling on something that looked like resignation. Amara, it's not that simple. Not that simple. Not a denial. Not an explanation. Just an admission wrapped in justification. It is that simple, David. Either you're sleeping with her or you're not. He ran his hands through his hair and sat down heavily on our couch. Sandra and I have a connection that's hard to explain. She understands my work, my ambitions, my goals in a way that I don't. You're different people. You want different things. I want you. I want our marriage. I've given up everything to support your career, and this is how you repay me. You haven't given up everything. You've made choices. We both have. I made choices to support us. You made choices to betray us. David stood up and started pacing. This isn't about betrayal, Amara. This is about two people who want different things from life. You want security and stability and a traditional marriage. I want to build something extraordinary. So Sandra represents extraordinary and I represent ordinary? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. We stared at each other across our beautifully appointed living room, the room I had decorated to reflect his taste, filled with furniture I had chosen to impress his colleagues, organized around a lifestyle designed entirely to support his success. What do you want from me, David? I want you to understand that this business opportunity is incredible. I want you to support me the way you always have. You want me to finance your business with another woman using my inheritance money. It's not like that. Then tell me what it's like. David sat back down and reached for my hands. His touch felt foreign now, tainted by the knowledge that he had been touching someone else. Amara, you know I care about you. You know how much I appreciate everything you've done for me for us. But Sandra and I, we have something professionally that I've never experienced before. We challenge each other, we inspire each other, we bring out the best in each other's work. And personally, we understand each other in ways that you and I have never understood each other. There it was. The truth I had been dreading but somehow expecting. So, what are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to help me make this business a reality. I'm asking you to believe in me the way you always have. And then what? I finance your partnership with the woman you're having an affair with, and then what happens to our marriage? David was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. I don't know. Nothing changes, or we work through this, or I choose you. I don't know. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while David slept peacefully beside me. He was asking me to fund his new life with another woman using the last financial independence I had. He was asking me to make the ultimate sacrifice for a relationship he had already checked out of. The smart thing would have been to say no. The smart thing would have been to protect my assets and start planning my exit strategy. The smart thing would have been to recognize that David was asking me to pay for my own replacement. But I wasn't feeling smart. I was feeling desperate. Because here's what I couldn't face. If I said no to David's business plan, I would be admitting that our marriage was over. If I refused to support his dream, I would be the obstacle standing between him and the success he wanted. I would be the bitter wife who couldn't handle her husband's professional partnership with a brilliant woman. And maybe, just maybe, if I showed him the ultimate act of faith and support, he would remember why he married me. Maybe if I proved that I believed in him enough to risk everything, he would realize that what we had was worth fighting for. So I made the most catastrophic decision of my life. Okay, I told him the next morning over coffee. Let's do it. David's face lit up like Christmas morning. Really? You'll support the business. I'll do more than support it. I'll invest everything we have to make sure it succeeds. Amara, you don't have to. Yes, I do. This is what marriage looks like, right? We invest in each other's dreams. David pulled me into his arms and held me tight. You're incredible. I promise you won't regret this. But I already regretted it. Even as I was saying the words, even as I was making the commitment, I knew I was making a mistake. I was handing over my financial security to fund a business partnership between my husband and his lover. I was paying for my own destruction. Over the next month, I threw myself into making David's business dream a reality with the same dedication I had always shown to his success. I researched commercial real estate options and accompanied them to property viewings. I helped design their office layout and coordinated with contractors for renovations. I set up their business banking accounts and organized their initial marketing materials. I worked alongside Sandra Phillips to build the infrastructure for Mitchell and Phillips, attorneys at law, and pretended not to notice the way she and David looked at each other when they thought I wasn't watching. Sandra was everything I wasn't. She was confident where I was accommodating. She was ambitious where I was supportive. She had her own money, her own career, her own identity that existed completely independent of any man. She was also kind to me in a way that made everything worse. She complimented my organizational skills and thanked me for my help with genuine warmth. She treated me like a valued friend rather than an obstacle to overcome, which made it impossible to hate her, even though she was sleeping with my husband. The business launched in April with a celebration party that I planned and hosted. I watched David and Sandra cut the ribbon on their new office, watched them pose for photos as founding partners, watched them accept congratulations from colleagues and clients who had no idea they were celebrating more than a business partnership. I smiled and played the supportive wife role perfectly, accepting praise for my behind-the-scenes work while David and Sandra basked in the spotlight of their professional achievement. That night, David made love to me with a passion that felt like gratitude. He whispered about how proud he was to have me as his partner, how none of this would have been possible without my support, how lucky he was to have someone who believed in him so completely. I held him close and tried to memorize the feeling of being wanted by him, because some part of me knew it was the last time. 3 weeks later, he asked me for a divorce. But not before he had one more devastating blow to deliver. Amara, we need to talk. It was a Tuesday afternoon in May. David had come home early from the office, which was unusual since the business was still in its demanding startup phase. He looked nervous in a way I had rarely seen. Is everything okay with the firm? The firm is great. Better than great, actually. We're already exceeding our projected client load. That's wonderful news. It is. But that's not what I want to talk about. David sat down across from me at our kitchen table, the table where we had shared thousands of meals, where I had helped him study for the bar exam, where we had planned our entire life together. Amara, I need you to know that I care about you deeply. I need you to know that everything you've done for me, for us, has meant the world to me. The past tense made my blood run cold. Had meant, not means. David, what's going on? I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about what I want from life, about what kind of person I want to be. And I've realized that I haven't been fair to you. What do you mean? I mean that I've let you build your entire life around supporting my dreams without ever really asking what your dreams are. I've let you sacrifice your own ambitions to make mine possible. This was not the conversation I had been expecting. I chose to support you. That's what marriage is. But that's just it. I don't think that is what marriage should be. I think marriage should be two people pursuing their own ambitions while supporting each other. I think it should be two people who are complete on their own, coming together to make something even better. Like you and Sandra. David's face flushed. Sandra and I are partners in every sense of the word. We challenge each other professionally and personally. We make each other stronger. And I make you weaker. You make me comfortable. But comfort isn't the same thing as growth. I stared at this man I had loved for 6 years, this man I had built my entire identity around supporting, and realized that my greatest fear was coming true. He wasn't just leaving me for Sandra Phillips. He was leaving me because I had become exactly what he had asked me to become, and now he found that version of me lacking. What are you saying, David? I'm saying that I think we both deserve to be with people who inspire us to be our best selves. I'm saying that I don't think we want the same things from life anymore. So you want a divorce. I want both of us to be happy. And I don't think we can be happy together. The irony was crushing. I had spent 5 years making sure David was happy, and now my reward was being told that my happiness was incompatible with his. When do you want me to move out? Amara, you don't have to move anywhere. This is your home too. But you're choosing Sandra. David was quiet for a long moment. Yes. 1 word. 5 letters. The complete destruction of everything I had believed about my life. There's something else, David said quietly. About the business. Of course there was something else. There's always something else when your world is ending. The partnership agreement we signed when we started the firm, it has some clauses that might affect the divorce settlement. I felt my stomach drop to my shoes. What kind of clauses? Since you contributed the initial capital as an investment rather than a loan, and since you're not a licensed attorney, you don't have any ownership stake in the firm itself. Your contribution was essentially a gift to help us get started. A gift. $200,000 of my inheritance money was a gift. So I get nothing back from the business? The business assets belong to the partners. But in the divorce, we'll split our personal assets 50-50, of course. Our personal assets, which now consisted of approximately $30,000 in checking accounts and some furniture. David had used my money to build a business with his lover, structured the partnership to exclude me from any ownership, and was now leaving me with essentially nothing while he and Sandra built their future on the foundation I had provided. I had funded my own betrayal down to the last penny. You planned this, I said quietly. The business structure, the partnership agreement, you planned this whole thing. Amara, it wasn't like that. The business is real, and it's successful. You used me. You used my money and my support and my love to build a life with someone else. I never meant for it to happen this way. But you're not sorry it did. David looked at me with something that might have been pity. I'm sorry you're hurt. But I'm not sorry about Sandra. And I'm not sorry about choosing the life I want instead of settling for the life I thought I should want. Settling. That's what our entire marriage had been to him. Settling. That night, David packed a bag and moved into a hotel while we figured out the logistics of our separation. I sat alone in our beautiful apartment, The apartment we could afford because of my financial sacrifice, decorated according to his taste, organized around his needs, and realized that I had nothing left. No career, because I had given it up to support his. No money, because I had invested it all in his business with another woman. No identity, because I had spent 5 years becoming David Mitchell's wife instead of remaining Amara Johnson. No future, because I had tied my entire sense of purpose to a man who had decided I wasn't ambitious enough for the life he wanted to build. I was 26 years old, and I had nothing to show for my adult life except the ability to plan dinner parties and coordinate social calendars for a man who had just told me I wasn't worth fighting for. The woman who had sacrificed everything for love had been abandoned by the very person she had sacrificed everything for. But sometimes, when you lose everything, the universe gets ready to give you something extraordinary in return. I just had no idea that my lottery ticket was about to change everything. The thing about being abandoned is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow unraveling where each day brings a new realization of just how completely you've been erased from someone else's life. David moved out on a Wednesday. By Friday, I was getting phone calls from friends asking if the rumors about our separation were true. By the following Monday, I was being uninvited from social events that David and I had always attended together. "I'm so sorry, Amara," said Jennifer Walsh, the wife of one of David's former colleagues at Hartwell, Morrison and Associates. "But since David is bringing Sandra to the charity auction, we thought it might be awkward for you to be there too." Bringing Sandra. Less than a week after asking me for a divorce, David was already escorting his new girlfriend to public events. The same events I had spent years organizing, planning, and attending as the perfect law firm wife. Of course, I managed to say, "I understand completely." But I didn't understand. How does someone transition so seamlessly from married to single to coupled with someone new? How does someone replace a wife of 6 years with a business partner and make it look effortless? The answer, I was learning, was that David hadn't been transitioning at all. He had been living a double life for months, and now he was simply choosing which life to keep. The divorce proceedings started immediately, and that's when I discovered just how thoroughly I had been outmaneuvered. David's attorney was Richard Steinberg, a senior partner at one of Atlanta's most prestigious family law firms. My attorney was whoever I could afford with my rapidly dwindling savings, which turned out to be Janet Morrison, no relation to the Morrison in David's former firm, who operated out of a strip mall office and handled mostly uncontested divorces. "Mrs. Mitchell," Janet said during our first meeting, "I have to be honest with you. This business investment situation is going to be complicated." "How complicated?" Janet spread the partnership documents across her desk. "You contributed $200,000 to establish Mitchell and Phillips, but you did so as a gift to your husband rather than as a loan or investment that would give you ownership rights." "But that was my inheritance money." "I understand. But legally, once you gifted that money to your husband, it became marital property. And then your husband used that marital property to establish a business with Ms. Phillips. So I have some claim to the business?" "You would, except for this clause here." Janet pointed to a paragraph buried in the legal text. "The partnership agreement explicitly states that only licensed attorneys can hold ownership stakes in the firm. Since you're not an attorney, you can't own part of the business, even though your money funded it." I felt sick. So David gets to keep a business I paid for because I'm not a lawyer? It's more complex than that, but essentially yes. Your contribution is treated as marital property that was used to benefit your husband's career, similar to how supporting a spouse through medical school is treated in divorce proceedings. But if I had supported him through medical school, he'd still owe me something back. If you had a written agreement, yes. But there's no written agreement here establishing your contribution as anything other than a gift. Janet continued reviewing the documents while I sat there processing the magnitude of my situation. David hadn't just taken my money, he had taken it in a way that ensured I could never get it back. "There is one potential avenue," Janet said carefully. If we can prove that your husband entered into the partnership agreement with the intention of defrauding you of marital assets, we might be able to challenge the business structure. How would we prove that? We'd need evidence that he planned the affair and the business partnership specifically to exclude you from the assets. Emails, text messages, recorded conversations, something that shows premeditation. Evidence I didn't have and couldn't get. David wasn't stupid enough to put his deception in writing, and I had been too trusting to gather documentation of his betrayal. The legal consultations continued for weeks, each meeting bringing worse news about my financial situation. Georgia's no-fault divorce laws meant that David's infidelity didn't matter in terms of asset division. The business structure meant that my contribution was untouchable. Our limited personal assets meant that my half of the marital estate would amount to maybe $15,000 plus some furniture. Meanwhile, David was living his best life. I found this out because Atlanta's legal community is small and gossip travels fast. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard about David and Sandra's romantic dinners at expensive restaurants. I heard about their weekend trips to Charleston and Savannah. I heard about how they were being invited to social events as a couple, how clients were commenting on their brilliant partnership, how they were already talking about expanding their practice. They were building the exact life David and I had planned together, except with someone who could contribute equally to both the personal and professional partnership. The most devastating information came from Rebecca Chin, who remained one of my few friends willing to maintain contact during the divorce. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," Rebecca said over coffee one afternoon, "but I think you need to know what people are saying." "What are they saying?" "David has been telling people that you weren't supportive of his career ambitions. He's been saying that you wanted him to stay in a safe corporate job while he wanted to build something extraordinary." I stared at her. "He's been saying I wasn't supportive?" "He's painting the narrative that you two grew apart because you wanted different things. He's making it sound like you were holding him back from his potential." "I funded his business with my inheritance money." "I know that. You know that. But David is controlling the story, and his version makes him look like an ambitious entrepreneur whose wife couldn't handle his success." The rewriting of our history was breathtaking in its audacity. David had convinced people that I was the obstacle to his dreams when I had literally paid for those dreams to become reality. But the most painful part was how easily people believed his version. The legal community wanted to root for David and Sandra's romantic and professional partnership. They wanted to believe in the narrative of two brilliant lawyers falling in love while building something amazing together. No one wanted to hear about the discarded wife who had sacrificed everything only to be abandoned for someone better. The social isolation was almost as devastating as the financial betrayal. The couples David and I had socialized with for years suddenly became unavailable for dinner plans. The wives I had considered friends stopped returning my calls. The charity organizations I had volunteered with started giving my responsibilities to other people. I wasn't just losing my husband, I was losing my entire social world. "It's nothing personal," Margaret Hartwell explained when I ran into her at the grocery store. "It's just that David and Sandra are such a dynamic couple, and everyone is rooting for their success. It's hard to maintain friendships with both sides during a divorce." Both sides. As if David and I were equally responsible for the destruction of our marriage. As if I had chosen to be betrayed and abandoned. The worst part was watching how seamlessly Sandra slipped into the role I had spent years perfecting. She appeared at firm events as David's partner, charming clients and colleagues with the same social skills I had developed to support his career. But unlike me, Sandra was also bringing her own professional reputation and client base to the table. She was everything I had tried to be, plus everything I had given up to become David's wife. One evening in June, I made the mistake of driving past their office building. The lights were on in the Mitchell and Phillips suite, and I could see David and Sandra working late together. They were standing close, reviewing documents, and even from the street I could see the easy intimacy between them. This was the partnership David had always wanted, intellectual, professional, and romantic all at once. I had offered him one piece of that equation, but Sandra offered him everything. The real gut punch came when I received David's financial disclosure documents as part of the divorce proceedings. In the 3 months since our separation, Mitchell and Phillips had already generated over $100,000 in revenue. David's personal income projection for the year was triple what he had been making at Hartwell, Morrison and Associates. He had used my money to build a business that was making him wealthy, and I was entitled to none of it. But the universe has a sense of humor, and sometimes when you're at your absolute lowest point, it decides to intervene in the most unexpected ways. It was a Saturday in late June, and I was spending the day doing what had become my weekend routine, sitting alone in our apartment trying to figure out how to rebuild my life from nothing. I had been applying for jobs for weeks, but the employment gap from my years as David's wife was harder to explain than I had anticipated. Employers wanted to know what I had been doing for the past 5 years, and supporting my husband's career didn't translate well on a resume. I had exactly $4,000 left in my personal checking account. My rent on the apartment was $3,000 a month, rent I could afford when I was married to a successful attorney, but couldn't sustain on my own. I had maybe 6 weeks before I would be forced to move out and find somewhere cheaper to live. I was scrolling through apartment listings in less desirable parts of town when my phone rang. It was my mother, calling from Birmingham, where she lived with my stepfather. "Amara, honey, how are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Mom." The lie came automatically. I hadn't told my parents the full extent of my financial situation because I couldn't bear to admit how completely I had failed at managing my own life. "I've been worried about you. This divorce business is so complicated. It's almost over. We should have everything settled soon." "And then what? Will you move back to Birmingham? Your stepfather and I would love to have you nearby again." Moving back to Birmingham felt like admitting defeat, but it was starting to look like my only option. I could live with my parents temporarily while I figured out my next steps. I could probably find a job in marketing or administrative work, start over in a city where no one knew about my spectacular failure as a wife. "I might do that, Mom. Let me get through the divorce first." After hanging up, I sat in the silence of the apartment that would soon no longer be mine and tried to imagine what my life was going to look like. I was 26 years old with no career, no money, no social connections that weren't tied to David, and no clear path forward. For the first time since David had asked for the divorce, I let myself cry. Really cry. I sobbed for the dreams I had abandoned, for the money I had lost, for the years I had wasted becoming someone else's idea of the perfect woman. I cried for the naive 21-year-old who had believed that love meant sacrifice and who had sacrificed so much that she had disappeared entirely. When I finally stopped crying, I felt empty but also strangely clear. I was going to lose everything I had built my adult life around, but maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Maybe losing everything would force me to figure out who Amara Johnson was supposed to be when she wasn't trying to be David Mitchell's wife. I decided to go for a walk to clear my head and think about practical next steps. As I was leaving the apartment building, I passed the corner store where I had bought coffee and newspapers countless times over the years. On impulse, I stopped in to buy a bottle of water. At the checkout counter, there was a display of lottery tickets, Powerball, Mega Millions, scratch-offs. I had never bought a lottery ticket in my life. David had always said they were a waste of money, a tax on people who couldn't do math. But David's opinion didn't matter anymore. Nothing he had ever said mattered anymore. "I'll take a Powerball ticket," I told the clerk. "Quick pick or choose your numbers?" "Quick pick." The ticket cost $2. $2 I probably shouldn't have spent given my financial situation. But it felt like a tiny act of rebellion, a small way of choosing hope over despair. I folded the ticket into my wallet and forgot about it. I had no idea that I had just bought my way out of the worst period of my life and into a future that would prove everything David had said about ambition and worth completely wrong. But that revelation was still 3 days away. For now, I was just a woman walking home to an apartment I couldn't afford, carrying a lottery ticket I didn't expect to win, preparing to start over from nothing. Sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways. Sometimes your lowest moment is actually the setup for your highest triumph. I just didn't know it yet. The final divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 months after David had asked me to leave. I should have felt relief that the legal process was finally over, but instead I felt nothing but hollowness as I signed my name to documents that officially erased 6 years of my life. Janet Morrison had managed to negotiate a settlement that was slightly better than the worst-case scenario. I would receive $22,000 as my share of our marital assets, plus I could keep my car and my personal belongings. David would keep the apartment, the business, and everything else we had built together. $22,000. That's what 6 years of marriage, $200,000 of inheritance money, and complete devotion to someone else's dreams had been worth in the end. "I'm sorry we couldn't do better," Janet said as I signed the final page. "The business structure really tied our hands. I know you did your best. What will you do now?" "Move back to Birmingham with my parents. Start over." The words tasted like failure in my mouth, but they were the truth. I had already given notice on the apartment and hired movers to pack my belongings. In 2 weeks, I would be living in my childhood bedroom, trying to figure out how to rebuild a life at 26. I spent that afternoon in the apartment, packing the last of my personal items and trying not to think about all the memories attached to every object. The coffee mugs we had bought on our honeymoon. The books I had collected but never read because I was too busy managing David's life. The photo albums documenting our relationship from hopeful beginning to bitter end. I was wrapping picture frames when I came across our wedding album. For some reason, I opened it and started flipping through photos of the naive young woman I had been, so confident that love would be enough to build a happy life. There was David looking handsome in his tuxedo, me radiant in a dress I had saved for months to afford. Our families mingling happily, toasting our future, celebrating what everyone believed would be a lasting partnership. I lingered on a photo of David's best man giving his speech. It was his law school roommate, Marcus Webb, talking about how David was the luckiest man alive to find someone as supportive and dedicated as me. In the photo, David was looking at me with what appeared to be genuine love and gratitude. Had that love been real? Or had I been fooling myself about that too? I was about to close the album when something caught my eye. In one of the reception photos, I could see Sandra Phillips in the background. Sandra had been at our wedding. I stared at the photo, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Sandra was sitting at a table with other young attorneys, smiling and raising her glass during the toast. She looked exactly the same as she did now, confident, beautiful, completely at ease. But that was impossible. David had told me he met Sandra when she joined the opposing counsel team for the corporate case. That was only 8 months ago. Our wedding was 6 years ago. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the group photo from David's law school graduation. I had organized the whole celebration, coordinated with families, arranged the restaurant reservation. I remembered every detail of that day. I scanned the faces in the photo until I found her. Sandra Phillips, standing in the second row with her classmates, right next to David. They had gone to law school together. They had known each other for years before the corporate case. David had lied to me about when and how they met. My hands were shaking as I opened my phone and called Rebecca Chin. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something about Sandra Phillips." "Amara, are you okay? You sound upset." "When did Sandra join Morrison's corporate division?" "I'm not sure exactly." "Why? Can you find out?" "It's important." "Hold on, let me check the firm directory." I waited, my heart pounding, while Rebecca looked up Sandra's employment history. Okay, according to this, Sandra has been with Morrison for 4 years. She joined their corporate team right after graduation. For years. Sandra had been working at Morrison, David's former firm's biggest competitor, for 4 years. And David had somehow failed to mention that his opposing counsel was someone he had known since law school. Rebecca. Did David ever mention knowing Sandra before the corporate case? No, he always talked about her like she was this impressive stranger he was learning to respect professionally. Why? I think I need to do some research. I spent the next 3 hours digging through every photo, document, and piece of correspondence I could find from David's law school years. What I discovered made me physically sick. Sandra Phillips hadn't just known David in law school, she had been close to him. In multiple group photos, they were standing together, clearly comfortable with each other. In one photo from a law school party, David's arm was around her waist. I found a program from their law school's moot court competition. David and Sandra had been partners, competing together as a team. At the bottom of the program, there was a note thanking sponsors and supporters, including the partners' families and friends who make our success possible. They had been partners before. Academic partners, possibly romantic partners. And David had pretended not to know her when she appeared as opposing counsel 8 months ago. The corporate case where they had supposedly fallen in love hadn't been the beginning of their relationship. It had been the resumption of a relationship that predated my entire marriage to David. I kept digging, and the evidence kept getting worse. I found David's old law school laptop in a box of items we had moved multiple times, but never unpacked. The password was still the same one he had used years ago, our wedding date, which now felt like a cosmic joke. The email account was mostly empty, but I found what I was looking for in the draft folder. Messages that had been written but never sent, saved automatically by the email system. The first one was dated 5 years ago, addressed to Sandra. I know we agreed to wait until the timing was right, but watching Amara organize my career like it's her full-time job is starting to feel suffocating. She's devoted, but she has no ambition of her own. Sometimes I wonder if I settled too quickly. 5 years ago, David had been questioning our marriage and staying in contact with Sandra since our 2nd year of marriage. The second draft was from 3 years ago. You were right about starting our own firm eventually. I think Amara would support anything I wanted to do professionally, which could work in our favor when it comes to initial capital. She inherited money from her grandmother last year, and she'd definitely invested if I asked her to. They had been planning to use my inheritance money for 3 years. The third draft was from last year. Morrison versus Hartwell case could be perfect timing. If you take lead counsel, we could work opposite each other and rebuild our connection without raising suspicions. Amara doesn't know about our history, so she won't think anything of it. The corporate case hadn't been a coincidence. It had been orchestrated. Sandra had specifically taken the lead counsel position so she and David could rebuild their connection, while I thought I was watching my husband develop professional respect for a brilliant stranger. I was going to be sick. But there was one more draft, dated just 4 months ago. Amara's inheritance investment should be enough to get us started. The partnership structure you suggested will protect the business assets in case of divorce. I know this seems calculated, but we both deserve to be with someone who challenges us. Amara is sweet, but she's not an equal partner. She's a support system. You and I are equals. Not an equal partner. A support system. David and Sandra had spent years planning to use my money to start their business, structure it to exclude me from ownership, and then discard me once I had served my purpose. The woman I had trusted to help plan their office space, the woman I had worked alongside to build their business, the woman I had been kind to even though she was sleeping with my husband, she had been plotting against me from the beginning. Every kind word Sandra had said to me, every compliment about my organizational skills, every thank you for my help, it had all been manipulation. She had been playing a role, pretending to be grateful for my assistance while secretly planning to steal my husband and my money. But the worst part was realizing that David had never loved me the way I thought he had. Our entire marriage had been him settling for me while he waited for the right moment to reunite with the woman he actually wanted. I had been a placeholder, a convenient support system who came with an inheritance that could fund his real dreams with his real partner. I sat on the floor of our almost empty apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my complete humiliation, and felt something crack inside me. Not just my heart, that had been broken when David asked for the divorce. This was deeper. This was the destruction of my entire understanding of my own life. Every sacrifice I had made, every dream I had deferred, every moment of doubt I had ignored, it had all been for a man who had been planning to discard me from the beginning. I called Rebecca back. "I need you to meet me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I need you to see something." Rebecca came over immediately, and I showed her everything I had found. The photos, the emails, the timeline that proved David and Sandra's relationship predated my marriage. "Oh my God, Amara," Rebecca said, staring at the laptop screen. This is fraud. He defrauded you of your inheritance money under false pretenses. Can I do anything about it legally? With this evidence? Absolutely. This proves intentional deception and planning. You could reopen the divorce settlement, maybe even file criminal charges. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. I felt anger. Pure, righteous, energizing anger. "I want copies of everything," I said. "I want documentation that proves exactly what they did." Rebecca helped me print and organize all the evidence. We created a timeline showing the premeditation, the deception, the calculated use of my inheritance money. "What are you going to do?" Rebecca asked. "I'm going to destroy them." It felt good to say those words. It felt good to have a purpose beyond wallowing in self-pity. But first, I needed to go home and figure out my strategy. I needed to plan my approach carefully, because David and Sandra were smart lawyers who wouldn't go down easily. I was walking to my car when I remembered something. The lottery ticket I had bought 3 days ago in a moment of rebellion. The drawing was tonight, and I had forgotten to check the numbers. I pulled up the winning numbers on my phone while sitting in my car: 15, 27, 33, 41, 52, and Powerball 18. Then I dug through my wallet and found my ticket: 15, 27, 33, 41, 52, and Powerball 18. I stared at the numbers for a full minute, certain I was misreading something. I checked them again. Then again. Every number matched. I had won the lottery. Not just any lottery, the biggest Powerball jackpot in Georgia history. $267 million. I sat in that parking lot, holding a lottery ticket worth more money than I could comprehend, and started laughing. Not happy laughter, hysterical, disbelieving laughter. The universe had just handed me the ultimate weapon. David had spent years calling me unambitious. He had discarded me for someone he considered more driven and successful. He had told people I was holding him back from his potential. Now I was worth more money than he would make in 10 lifetimes. The woman he had considered a support system, the wife he had found insufficient for his ambitions, the placeholder he had discarded for someone better, she had just become one of the wealthiest people in Georgia. I thought about David and Sandra in their little law office, proud of their $100,000 in revenue, building what they thought was their empire on the foundation of my inheritance money. I thought about the social circle that had abandoned me, the people who had chosen to support the exciting new couple over the discarded wife. I thought about everyone who had believed David's narrative that I lacked ambition and couldn't handle his success. They were all about to discover exactly how ambitious I could be, and exactly what justice looked like when the universe decided to settle its accounts. You would think that winning $267 million would solve all your problems instantly. You would think that having more money than you could spend in 3 lifetimes would make everything else fade into insignificance. You would be wrong. I sat in that parking lot for 2 hours, staring at the lottery ticket and trying to process what had just happened to my life. The numbers kept swimming in front of my eyes, refusing to feel real. 15, 27, 33, 41, 52, and Powerball 18. The sequence that had just transformed me from a broke divorcee into one of the wealthiest people in the state. But instead of joy or relief or excitement, I felt completely numb. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the emotional overload of discovering David and Sandra's betrayal on the same day I became a millionaire. Maybe it was the surreal absurdity of having my worst day and my luckiest day happen simultaneously. Or maybe it was the dawning realization that money couldn't fix what they had broken inside me. I drove home in a daze, the lottery ticket burning a hole in my wallet like evidence of a crime I hadn't committed yet. The apartment felt even emptier than before, all my packed boxes creating a landscape of endings and transitions. I called the lottery office and learned that I had 180 days to claim my prize. I could take the lump sum of $168 million after taxes, or the annuity payments over 30 years. Either way, it was life-changing money. But as I hung up the phone, I realized that having the money and knowing what to do with it were completely different things. I had spent the last 6 years of my life as David Mitchell's wife. I had no career, no business experience, no financial knowledge beyond basic household budgeting. I had never managed anything more complex than a dinner party budget or a charity fundraiser. What was I supposed to do with $168 million? More importantly, what was I supposed to do with the knowledge that my entire adult life had been a lie? I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down with all the evidence Rebecca and I had compiled. The photos, the emails, the timeline of David and Sandra's deception. Looking at it all together, the scope of their betrayal was breathtaking. They hadn't just fallen in love and made a mistake. They had executed a years-long plan to use my money and my labor to build their dream life together, with me as an unwitting accomplice to my own destruction. Every conversation I'd had with Sandra about their business plans. Every time I'd helped coordinate their office setup. Every moment I'd spent being grateful for her kindness while she was actively plotting to steal my husband and my inheritance. I had been so completely manipulated that I couldn't trust my own memories anymore. Had David ever loved me? Or had I been nothing but a convenient stepping stone from the very beginning? I opened another bottle of wine and kept reading. The more I learned about their deception, the more I understood how naive and pathetic I had been. How easily they had manipulated me. How thoroughly they had convinced me that supporting David's career was the same thing as building our future together. I found more evidence buried in old files. Credit card statements showing dinners David had charged to our account while claiming to work late. Hotel receipts from business trips that had coincided with Sandra's vacation time from Morrison. Phone records showing hundreds of calls between them during the year they were supposedly building professional respect. They had been having an affair for at least a year before David asked me for a divorce. Maybe longer. While I was planning romantic getaways to save our marriage, David was planning romantic getaways with Sandra using our joint credit card. I had funded my own humiliation in more ways than I could count. By midnight, I was drunk and crying and completely overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had been done to me. The lottery ticket was sitting on my coffee table next to printouts of David's emails, and the contrast felt obscene. I was simultaneously the luckiest and unluckiest person in Georgia. The next morning brought a hangover and a clarity that felt almost worse than the drunken despair. I had two choices. I could claim my lottery winnings and disappear, or I could use my newfound wealth to destroy the people who had destroyed me. The smart choice was probably to disappear. Take the money, move somewhere David and Sandra would never find me, and build a new life far away from the scene of my humiliation. But I couldn't stop thinking about Margaret Hartwell's words from the grocery store. Everyone is rooting for their success. Everyone was rooting for David and Sandra because they believed the story David had told about our marriage. They believed I had been unsupportive of his ambitions. They believed I had held him back from his potential. They believed I was the kind of woman who lacked drive and vision. David had rewritten our history to make himself the hero and me the obstacle. And everyone had accepted that narrative because it was easier than acknowledging that sometimes good people get destroyed by the people they love most. If I disappeared quietly, David's version of our story would become the official truth. He would get to keep his reputation as the brilliant lawyer who overcame an unambitious wife to build something extraordinary with his perfect partner. Sandra would get to be celebrated as the woman who inspired him to reach his potential. And I would be remembered as the bitter ex-wife who couldn't handle her husband's success. The thought of that narrative surviving unchallenged made me physically ill. But planning revenge while emotionally devastated and financially overwhelmed felt impossible. I didn't know how to manage sudden wealth. I didn't know how to navigate the legal system as anything other than a victim. I didn't know how to be strategic when I could barely function day to day. I called Rebecca and asked her to come over. "How are you processing all of this?" she asked when she saw the lottery ticket and the evidence spread across my coffee table. "I'm not processing it. I'm drowning in it." "Amara, do you understand what this means? You have the resources now to fight back properly. You can hire the best attorneys in the state. You can reopen your divorce settlement. You can make sure everyone knows what David and Sandra really did. I don't know how to do any of that. I don't know how to be rich. I don't know how to be anything other than someone's wife." Rebecca sat down across from me and took my hands. "Then learn. You have time and money and motivation. Learn how to be the woman who destroys people who deserve to be destroyed." What if I'm not that woman? What if I'm just the kind of person who gets used and discarded? The woman who organized David's entire career for 6 years? The woman who managed every aspect of his professional and social life? The woman who turned herself into the perfect law firm wife? That woman has more strategic ability than most CEOs. You just need to start using those skills for yourself instead of for someone else. Rebecca was right, but knowing it intellectually and believing it emotionally were different things. I had been trained for 6 years to think of myself as a supporting character in someone else's story. Now I had to learn how to be the protagonist of my own story. And I had to do it while grieving the loss of everything I had thought my life was. The next few days were a blur of practical arrangements that felt surreal. I hired a financial advisor, a tax attorney, and a wealth management firm. I set up offshore accounts and investment portfolios and trust funds. I was making decisions about more money than I could conceptualize while living in an apartment full of packed boxes, eating takeout for every meal because I was too emotionally exhausted to cook. The contrast between my inner devastation and my outer transformation was jarring. On paper, I was becoming one of the most financially powerful people in Atlanta. In reality, I was barely holding myself together. I kept drinking too much wine. I kept crying at random moments. I kept waking up in the middle of the night replaying every conversation I'd had with David, looking for signs I should have seen. The worst part was the isolation. I couldn't tell anyone about the lottery win yet. The advisor had recommended keeping it quiet until all the legal and financial structures were in place. So I was processing the biggest change in my life completely alone. I couldn't even properly celebrate because celebration felt wrong when I was simultaneously mourning the destruction of everything I had believed about my marriage. The money felt tainted by the circumstances that had led to it. I had bought that lottery ticket as a tiny act of rebellion against David's financial control. Now it represented the ultimate irony. I had accidentally acquired more wealth and power than he could imagine while he was busy explaining to people that I lacked ambition. But having the power to destroy someone and knowing how to use that power were different things entirely. I spent hours researching David and Sandra online, learning about their business success, their social media presence, their professional reputation. Mitchell and Phillips was being featured in legal publications as an example of innovative partnership structure. David was being profiled as a rising star in Atlanta's legal community. They were building exactly the life they had planned, funded by my money, celebrated by people who believed David's lies about our marriage. Meanwhile, I was sitting alone in an apartment I couldn't afford anymore, surrounded by evidence of my own destruction, trying to figure out how to turn sudden wealth into effective revenge. The psychological weight of the betrayal was crushing. It wasn't just that David had cheated on me or even that he had stolen my money. It was that he had systematically erased my sense of self over 6 years, convincing me that my worth was tied entirely to my usefulness to him. And then he had discarded me the moment he found someone more useful. I had spent so many years defining myself through his success that I didn't know who I was without that role. Adding sudden wealth to the identity crisis made everything feel even more unreal. Who was Amara Johnson when she wasn't David Mitchell's wife? Who was she when she had more money than she knew how to spend? Who was she when she had the power to destroy the people who had destroyed her? I didn't know. And the not knowing felt almost as devastating as the betrayal itself. 2 weeks after discovering the evidence and winning the lottery, I was still living in the same packed apartment, still drinking too much wine, still crying at random moments. I had the means to fight back, but I felt more powerless than ever. The woman who had managed every detail of David's professional life couldn't manage her own emotional recovery. The woman who had organized charity galas and dinner parties for dozens of people couldn't organize her own thoughts enough to plan effective revenge. I had all the weapons I needed to destroy David and Sandra. I just didn't know who I was supposed to become in order to use them. But sometimes when you're at your absolute lowest point, when you feel most lost and broken and unsure of everything, the universe sends you exactly the person you need to remind you who you really are underneath all the damage. That person was about to walk into my life and change everything. Again. The person who changed everything was someone I never expected to matter in my story. Her name was Elena Vasquez, and she knocked on my door on a Thursday afternoon while I was sitting on my couch in pajamas at 3 o'clock, surrounded by empty wine bottles and crumpled tissues, looking like the poster child for rock bottom. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said when I opened the door. "I'm Elena Vasquez from Pinnacle Wealth Management. I believe you've been expecting me." I had completely forgotten about the appointment. My financial advisor had recommended bringing in a specialist to help structure my lottery winnings, and I had agreed to meet with her without really paying attention to the details. Elena was not what I had expected from a wealth management consultant. She was probably in her early 40s, impeccably dressed in a way that suggested serious money, but she had warm eyes and an energy that felt immediately trustworthy. "I'm sorry," I said, suddenly aware that I looked like I hadn't showered in days. "I completely forgot you were coming. This isn't a good time." "Actually," Elena said, glancing past me at the chaos of my apartment, "this might be exactly the right time. May I come in?" Something about her tone made me step aside and let her enter. She took in the packed boxes, the evidence scattered across my coffee table, the general disaster of my living situation, and then sat down calmly on my couch. "So," she said, "you've recently come into significant wealth under difficult circumstances. How did you know about the circumstances?" "I make it my business to understand my clients' situations completely. I know about your divorce, your ex-husband's business partnership, and the timeline of events that led to your lottery win." I felt exposed and defensive. I didn't realize my personal life was relevant to wealth management. Your personal life is everything when it comes to wealth management. Money is just a tool. How you use that tool depends entirely on who you are and what you want your life to look like. Elena opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I've done some research on your ex-husband's business. Very interesting partnership structure." "Interesting how?" "Interesting in that it's designed to exclude non-attorney investors from ownership, which is unusual for a startup that relied on external capital. Almost like they were planning for a specific scenario." She spread some documents across my coffee table, pushing aside my wine-stained printouts. "I also looked into Ms. Phillips' career trajectory. Did you know she turned down a partnership track position at Morrison specifically to leave and start this firm?" "She turned down partnership?" "Partnership at Morrison is worth at least $2 million a year. She gave that up to start over with your ex-husband." That's either true love or a very calculated business decision. Elena was laying out information that painted a different picture than the one I had been torturing myself with. What kind of calculated business decision? The kind where you're betting on a bigger payoff down the line. Mitchell and Phillips isn't just a law firm, they're positioning themselves to be acquired by a larger corporate legal group within 5 years. The partnership structure suggests they're planning an exit strategy that will make them both very wealthy. Using my money. Using your money as the foundation, yes. But here's what I find most interesting about your situation, Mrs. Mitchell. It's Ms. Johnson now. Ms. Johnson. What I find interesting is that you managed the entire strategic development of your ex-husband's career for 6 years. You coordinated his professional relationships, managed his social calendar, organized networking opportunities, and essentially functioned as his unpaid business manager and strategic advisor. I had never thought of it that way. I was just being supportive. You were running a career development consultancy. You took a law school graduate with decent grades and transformed him into a successful attorney with the right connections, social status, and professional reputation to start his own firm. Elena pulled out another document. I looked at his career progression. Before you, David Mitchell was middle of his class at a mid-tier law school with no family connections in the legal field. After 6 years with you, he was dining with senior partners, attending exclusive charity events, and building relationships with high-value clients. That was just part of being a law firm wife. No, that was strategic career development at the highest level. Most corporate consultants charge 6 figures for that kind of comprehensive professional transformation. The way Elena was describing my role made it sound intentional and valuable rather than pathetic and submissive. But I couldn't reconcile that perspective with how worthless I felt. If I was so good at career development, why did he leave me for someone better? He didn't leave you for someone better. He left you for someone who could be his partner in the next phase of his plan without requiring emotional investment. Elena leaned forward. Ms. Johnson, your ex-husband didn't discard you because you weren't good enough. He discarded you because you were too good. You made his success look effortless, which made it easy for him to take credit for what you had built together. I don't understand. Sandra Phillips brings professional credentials and earning potential to their partnership. But she doesn't bring the strategic relationship building skills that you do. She's brilliant at corporate law, but she's not brilliant at the kind of comprehensive business development that transforms careers. Elena pulled out her phone and showed me Mitchell and Phillips' website and social media presence. Look at their marketing. Look at their client outreach. Look at their professional positioning. I looked and immediately saw what she meant. The business looked successful on paper, but their marketing was generic. Their social media presence was minimal. Their networking strategy was limited to traditional legal channels. They're missing the element that you brought to David's career development, Elena said. The sophisticated relationship building, the social strategy, the comprehensive brand development. So they're successful now because they're riding the momentum you built for David's reputation. But they're not building sustainable growth beyond that foundation. Elena closed her laptop and looked at me directly. Ms. Johnson, I have a question for you. What if instead of using your lottery winnings to get revenge on the people who betrayed you, you use them to build something that makes their success look small in comparison? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, what if you took the skills you used to build David's career and used them to build your own empire? What if you became the person he wishes he could be instead of the person he threw away? I don't know how to build an empire. You built his. You just didn't get credit for it. Elena stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. I work with a lot of wealthy people, Ms. Johnson. Most of them inherited their money or got lucky in business. Very few of them have the combination of strategic thinking, relationship-building skills, and pure determination that you've demonstrated. I feel like I've demonstrated nothing but failure. You feel that way because you've been measuring your success by someone else's standards. But your ex-husband's career progression wasn't his achievement, It was yours. The question is whether you're ready to start taking credit for your own abilities. Something about the way Elena talked about my skills made me feel a spark of something I hadn't felt in months. Not quite hope, but possibility. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you have a choice to make. You can take your lottery winnings and disappear, which would be completely understandable. Or you can use them to build something that proves every person who underestimated you is wrong. Like what? Like the most successful strategic consulting firm in the Southeast. Like the kind of business that helps high-potential professionals and companies achieve the kind of transformation you achieved for David. Elena sat back down and pulled out a business plan outline. I've been thinking about this since I reviewed your file. You have the skills, the motivation, and now the capital to create something extraordinary. I don't have business experience. You have 6 years of intensive business development experience. You just did it for someone else's benefit instead of your own. She spread the outline across my coffee table. Strategic career development. Executive relationship building. Professional brand transformation. Social capital development. These are all services that corporations and high-net-worth individuals pay enormous amounts for. I stared at the business plan, trying to imagine myself as anything other than a discarded wife. This seems impossible. Impossible like winning the lottery? That was luck. Maybe. Or maybe the universe decided you were ready for the tools you needed to build the life you deserve. Elena packed up her materials and handed me her card. I'm going to leave this business plan with you. Think about it. Think about who you could become if you stopped defining yourself by what other people did to you and started defining yourself by what you're capable of building. What if I'm not capable of building anything? Then David Mitchell is a very mediocre lawyer who somehow managed one of the most impressive career transformations I've ever seen completely by accident. After Elena left, I sat alone with her business plan and a completely different perspective on my situation. For months, I had been thinking of myself as the victim of David and Sandra's manipulation. But Elena was suggesting that I had been the architect of David's success, not just the casualty of his betrayal. Maybe David hadn't succeeded despite my limitations. Maybe he had succeeded because of my contributions. Maybe the woman he had discarded as not ambitious enough was the same woman who had built the foundation for everything he was now celebrating as his achievement. I picked up the business plan and started reading. Elena had outlined a comprehensive strategy for building a consulting firm that would provide the exact services I had been providing David for free. Strategic career development. Relationship building. Professional brand transformation. Services that commanded 6-figure consulting fees when provided by established firms. Services I had been providing at the highest level for 6 years. I walked to my bathroom mirror and looked at myself honestly for the first time in months. I saw a 26-year-old woman who had managed complex professional relationships, coordinated high-stakes social events, and transformed a mediocre law school graduate into a successful attorney. I saw someone who had been so good at strategic thinking that she had been manipulated into using those skills to fund her own betrayal. I saw someone who had the business development abilities that David and Sandra were missing, combined with more money than they would ever have. For the first time since discovering David's betrayal, I felt something other than pain or anger. I felt power. The choice Elena had presented was stark. I could take my money and disappear, or I could use it to become the woman David had thrown away because he thought she wasn't ambitious enough. I could stay broken, or I could prove that everything he had believed about my worth was wrong. I could remain the victim of their manipulation, or I could become living proof that they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. I looked at my reflection and made my decision. I was going to build something that made David's little law firm look like a lemonade stand. I was going to become so successful that everyone who had written me off as the unambitious ex-wife would have to acknowledge what they had missed. I was going to prove that the woman David had considered not enough was actually more than he could ever hope to be. But first, I was going to claim my lottery prize publicly and make sure everyone knew that the woman they had pitted was now one of the most powerful people in Georgia. David wanted to see ambition? He was about to get a masterclass in what real ambition looked like. And it was going to destroy him. The Atlanta Legal Foundation's annual charity gala was exactly the kind of event I had spent years perfecting for David. 500 of the city's most influential attorneys, judges, and business leaders gathered in the ballroom of the Four Seasons to raise money for legal aid services and celebrate the year's most significant achievements in the legal community. I knew this because I had helped plan this exact event for 3 consecutive years. I knew the guest list, the seating arrangements, the program schedule, and the social dynamics that would play out over the course of the evening. I also knew that David and Sandra would be there as presenting sponsors, using their newfound success to buy credibility and recognition in Atlanta's legal elite. What they didn't know was that I would be there too, as the evening's keynote speaker. 3 months had passed since I made the decision to build something extraordinary instead of disappearing quietly. 3 months since Elena had shown me that I was the architect of David's success, not just the casualty of his betrayal. I had spent those 3 months transforming myself in ways that went far beyond what money could buy. The lottery claim had been the easy part. I held the press conference on a Tuesday morning, standing in front of the Georgia Lottery office with a check for $168 million after taxes. The photos showed a confident woman in a perfectly tailored business suit, smiling calmly as reporters asked questions about my plans for the money. I intend to invest in opportunities that create value for others while building something meaningful for myself, I had said. I've learned that the best way to honor good fortune is to use it purposefully. The reporters had expected tears of joy or overwhelming emotion. Instead, they got a composed businesswoman who spoke about investment strategies and community impact. David had called me that night. "Amara, I saw the news." "Congratulations, that's incredible." His voice carried a strange mixture of shock and something that might have been regret. Or calculation. "Thank you, David. I have to ask, when did you buy the lottery ticket?" "The day after I signed our divorce papers." The silence on his end told me he was doing the math. He was realizing that I had won more money than he could imagine just days after he had finished explaining to people that I lacked ambition. "Listen, I know things ended badly between us, but if you ever want to discuss investment opportunities..." "I already have investment opportunities." "Of course, I just meant that my business experience could be valuable if you're looking at legal or corporate investments." "David, I have to go. I have a meeting with my advisory board." I hung up before he could respond. It felt good to be the one ending the conversation. But the lottery win was just the foundation. What I built on top of it was something David couldn't have imagined in his wildest dreams. Elena had been right about my abilities. Once I started thinking of myself as a strategic consultant rather than a supporting spouse, everything became clear. I had spent 6 years developing exactly the skills that corporations and high-net-worth individuals paid enormous amounts to access. I used $50 million of my lottery winnings to establish the Amara Johnson Strategic Group, a consulting firm specializing in comprehensive professional transformation and strategic relationship development. But I didn't start small or build gradually. I used my wealth to recruit the best talent in the industry immediately. I hired former McKinsey consultants, ex-Goldman Sachs relationship managers, and business development specialists from Fortune 500 companies. Within 2 months, I had a team of 12 brilliant professionals working out of a stunning office space in Buckhead, 3 floors in the same building where David and Sandra rented their modest 2-room suite. My first clients were referrals from Elena's network. CEOs who needed to rebuild their professional reputations after scandals. Entrepreneurs who had the vision but lacked the social connections to scale their businesses. Politicians who needed to transform their public image. The work was exactly what I had been doing for David, but at a level of sophistication and compensation that reflected its true value. My team developed comprehensive strategies that included professional brand transformation, strategic relationship building, social capital development, and long-term reputation management. We charged between $50,000 and $200,000 per engagement, and we were booked solid within 6 weeks. But the real breakthrough came when I landed my signature client, Marcus Webb, David's former law school roommate who had given the best man speech at our wedding. Marcus had built a successful intellectual property practice, but wanted to transition into entertainment law. He needed the kind of comprehensive career pivot that required strategic relationship building, industry credibility development, and sophisticated networking. "I know this is awkward given your history with David," Marcus said during our initial consultation. "But I've watched what you did for his career development, and frankly, you're the best strategic thinker I've ever encountered." What I did for David's career? Amara, David was nobody when you married him. Decent grades, no connections, no particular distinction. Within 5 years, he was dining with senior partners and building relationships with major clients. That kind of transformation doesn't happen by accident. Marcus hired me for a 6-month engagement at $150,000. Within 4 months, I had positioned him as a thought leader in entertainment law, secured him speaking engagements at major industry conferences, and connected him with clients who generated over $1 million in new business. Word spread quickly through Atlanta's professional community. The Amara Johnson Strategic Group became the go-to firm for ambitious professionals who needed comprehensive career transformation. But my real masterpiece was yet to come. 6 weeks before the Legal Foundation Gala, I received a call from the Foundation's executive director. "Ms. Johnson, I hope this isn't presumptuous, but we're looking for a keynote speaker for our annual gala. Someone who represents innovation and success in the professional services sector." I smiled. "I'd be honored to speak." "Wonderful. Our theme this year is building excellence through partnership. I thought you could speak about strategic relationship building and professional development." "Actually, I'd like to speak about something more specific. I'd like to speak about recognizing and developing undervalued talent." The irony was perfect. David and Sandra would be sitting in the audience while I delivered a keynote about the kind of strategic thinking they had dismissed as lacking ambition. The week before the gala, I made one final preparation. I had my team compile a comprehensive analysis of Mitchell & Phillips' business performance, market positioning, and growth trajectory. What we found was exactly what Elena had predicted. David and Sandra were succeeding based on the momentum I had built for David's reputation, but they weren't building sustainable growth beyond that foundation. Their client development was limited to referrals from existing relationships. Their marketing was generic and ineffective. Their professional brand positioning was unclear and unfocused. Most telling, their revenue had plateaued after the initial 6-month surge. They were making decent money, but they weren't building the kind of exponential growth that would justify their expansion plans. Meanwhile, my firm had generated over $2 million in revenue in just 3 months, with a client waiting list that stretched into the following year. The night of the gala, I stood in front of my full-length mirror and saw someone I barely recognized. The woman looking back at me was confident, powerful, and absolutely certain of her own worth. I was wearing a custom Saint Laurent gown that cost more than David's monthly business expenses. My jewelry was understated but clearly expensive. My posture was straight, my expression calm, my entire presence radiating the kind of quiet authority that money can enhance, but not create. I looked like someone who belonged on magazine covers and corporate boards. I looked like someone who could command any room she entered. I looked like someone David would regret losing for the rest of his life. My driver picked me up at 7:30 in a black Mercedes that served as my mobile office. During the 15-minute drive to the Four Seasons, I reviewed my speech one final time and thought about how much had changed in just 6 months. The last time I had attended this gala, I was David Mitchell's wife, praised for my organizational skills and social graces. Tonight, I was Amara Johnson, keynote speaker and CEO of one of Atlanta's most successful consulting firms. The ballroom looked exactly as I remembered it, elegant, sophisticated, filled with the kind of people who shaped Atlanta's professional landscape. But my perspective was completely different. Instead of working behind the scenes to make sure David looked good, I was the center of attention. Instead of facilitating other people's networking, I was the person everyone wanted to meet. I spotted David and Sandra immediately. They were seated at table 12 with other mid-level attorneys and their spouses. Sandra looked beautiful in a navy cocktail dress that probably cost a fraction of what I had spent on accessories. David was wearing the same tuxedo he had worn to our wedding. They looked successful and happy, like the power couple they had always planned to be. They also looked small in a way that surprised me. Not physically small, but professionally small. Like people who were playing in a league they thought was impressive until they realized how many bigger leagues existed above them. I made my way through the cocktail reception, accepting congratulations on my business success and lottery win. Every conversation reinforced how completely the narrative about my marriage had changed. "Amara, your firm is all anyone can talk about," said Margaret Hartwell. "I heard you're booked through next year. We've been fortunate to work with some extraordinary clients. I also heard you turned down 3 acquisition offers already. I'm not interested in selling something I just started building." Margaret laughed. "Smart woman. I always knew you had more ambition than you let on." Always knew. The revisionist history was fascinating. 6 months ago, these same people had been explaining to each other why David needed a more ambitious partner. I saw David watching me from across the room. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something in his expression that gave me deep satisfaction. He looked stunned, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. Or maybe like he was realizing what he had given up. When dinner was served, I took my place at the head table with the foundation board members and other distinguished guests. From my seat, I had a perfect view of David and Sandra's table. I could see them whispering to each other, probably discussing my transformation. I could see Sandra looking at my dress, my jewelry, my confident posture. I could see David staring at me with an expression that mixed regret, confusion, and something that might have been longing. They were finally seeing the woman they had dismissed as unambitious. And she was more successful than they had ever imagined possible. When the foundation president introduced me as the keynote speaker, the applause was enthusiastic and sustained. I walked to the podium feeling completely calm and absolutely ready to deliver the speech that would change everything. "Good evening," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I would be standing here tonight as the CEO of a multi-million-dollar consulting firm, I would have laughed. Not because I didn't think it was possible, but because I had forgotten who I was capable of becoming. I paused and let my gaze sweep across the room, making brief eye contact with David. Tonight, I want to talk about recognizing and developing undervalued talent. But first, I want to tell you a story about the difference between supporting someone else's dreams and building your own. I told them about my marriage. Not in detail, but in broad strokes that painted a clear picture. I talked about spending 6 years developing someone else's career while neglecting my own potential. I talked about the difference between being appreciated for what you provide and being valued for who you are. I talked about the day I realized that the person I had been supporting didn't actually see me as a partner, but as a service provider whose contract had been terminated. The beautiful thing about rock bottom, I said, is that it gives you a very solid foundation to build from. I talked about Elena showing me that my skills had real value in the marketplace. I talked about the decision to stop measuring my worth by other people's standards and start building something that reflected my own vision. In 3 months, my team has helped our clients generate over $15 million in new business. We've facilitated career transformations, strategic partnerships, and professional breakthroughs that will impact our clients' lives for decades. I paused and looked directly at David and Sandra's table. But the most important thing I've learned is this. When someone tells you that you're not ambitious enough for their vision of success, thank them. They're giving you permission to stop limiting yourself to their small dreams and start building something worthy of your actual potential. The applause was thunderous. People stood up. I saw David's face go white as he realized that my speech was about him, about us, about the narrative he had constructed to justify our divorce. I wasn't done. There's something else I want to share with you tonight. Something about the importance of integrity in professional partnerships. I had prepared this part carefully, consulting with attorneys to make sure everything I said was legally sound. 6 months ago, I discovered that my marriage had ended not because of incompatible goals, but because of deliberate deception. I learned that my ex-husband and his current business partner had been planning their professional and personal partnership for years, using my financial contributions and strategic support to build the foundation for a business that was specifically structured to exclude me from ownership. The room was completely silent now. I could see David pushing back from his table, his face flushed with anger and panic. I learned that the corporate case where they supposedly met and fell in love was actually an orchestrated reunion between law school classmates who had been planning this business for years. Sandra was staring at me with pure hatred, probably realizing that I had found the evidence she thought she had hidden. I learned that my inheritance money had been used not just to fund their startup, but to fund a carefully planned strategy to replace me with someone they considered more suitable for their long-term goals. The murmurs in the audience were getting louder. I could see people turning to look at David and Sandra's table. But here's what I want you to understand about undervalued talent. Sometimes the person you dismiss as not ambitious enough is actually the person who built everything you're proud of. I clicked to the next slide in my presentation, which showed a detailed analysis of David's career progression. This timeline shows the professional transformation of a mid-tier law school graduate over 6 years. Associate position at a prestigious firm. Rapid advancement. High-value client relationships. Social connections that led to business opportunities. Another click. This timeline shows the strategic interventions that enabled that transformation. Professional relationship building. Social capital development. Strategic networking. Comprehensive brand management. Another click. This is the business plan for Mitchell and Phillips, showing projected revenue and growth strategies. Final click. And this is the actual performance data for Mitchell and Phillips compared to other startups in the legal services sector. The data showed exactly what Elena had predicted. Mitchell and Phillips was performing below industry averages for growth and client retention after their initial surge. In contrast, the Amara Johnson Strategic Group has generated over $2 million in revenue in 3 months, with a client satisfaction rate of 100% and a waiting list that extends through next year. I could see David starting to stand up, probably planning to leave before I could say anything else. The point of this comparison isn't to embarrass anyone, I said, though we all knew that wasn't true. The point is to illustrate what happens when undervalued talent stops accepting other people's assessment of their worth and starts building something that reflects their true capabilities. I closed my laptop and looked out at the audience. To everyone here who has ever been told they're not ambitious enough, not smart enough, not valuable enough, the person saying that is usually describing their own limitations, not yours. The standing ovation lasted for 3 full minutes. But I wasn't watching the audience. I was watching David and Sandra, who were sitting frozen at their table while 500 of Atlanta's most influential people applauded the speech that had just destroyed their reputations. When the applause finally died down, I saw David and Sandra making their way toward the exit. But they weren't going to escape that easily. David, I called out as they reached the ballroom doors. Sandra, don't leave on my account. They stopped and turned back to me. The entire room was watching now, sensing that the evening's drama wasn't over. I just wanted to thank you publicly, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom, for showing me what I was capable of when I stopped limiting myself to your vision of my potential. David's face was red with humiliation and anger. Amara, you're making a mistake. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the only mistake I made was waiting so long to recognize my own worth. Sandra stepped forward, probably hoping to salvage the situation with her legal training. This is inappropriate, Amara. This is a professional event. You're absolutely right, I said. This is a professional event, where professional achievements are recognized and celebrated. I'm just sharing my professional achievements, the same way you and David have been sharing yours. I looked around the room, making eye contact with the people who had been gossiping about my divorce for months. I won $267 million in the lottery. I built a multi-million-dollar business in 3 months. I'm booked with clients through next year, and I've been featured in Forbes as one of the most innovative entrepreneurs in the Southeast. I paused and looked directly at David. I did all of that in the 6 months since you told me I wasn't ambitious enough for the life you wanted to build. The silence in the room was deafening. David and Sandra were trapped between my words and an audience of 500 people who were finally seeing the truth about our marriage. Congratulations on your business success, I said with perfect politeness. I'm sure you'll do very well serving the mid-market legal needs of Atlanta's small business community. Then I smiled the same polite smile I had perfected as David's wife and walked back to my table to accept congratulations from people who finally understood exactly what David had thrown away. Justice, it turned out, tasted even sweeter than I had imagined. The morning after the gala, I woke up in my new penthouse apartment overlooking Piedmont Park and felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year: complete peace. Not the temporary satisfaction of revenge, though that had been sweet. Not the momentary validation of public recognition, though the standing ovation had been gratifying. This was deeper. This was the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of. I had coffee on my balcony while reading the coverage of the previous night's events. The Atlanta Business Journal had already posted an article titled, "Lottery Winner Builds Empire, While Ex-Husband Struggles." The legal community's online forums were buzzing with discussions about the most devastating keynote speech in Georgia legal history. But the most telling response came in the form of 17 missed calls from David. I listened to the voicemails over breakfast, watching the progression from angry to desperate to pleading. Amara, what you did last night was completely unprofessional. You humiliated Sandra and me in front of our entire professional community. Look, I understand you're angry about how our marriage ended, but destroying our business reputation isn't going to help anyone. Please call me back. We need to talk about this like adults. Amara, I know I made mistakes, but what you did last night could destroy everything Sandra and I have worked for. The final message was different in tone. I've been thinking about what you said last night, about me not seeing your potential. Maybe you're right. Maybe I never really understood what you brought to our partnership. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee and talk about a lot of things. I deleted all the messages without responding. Elena called while I was getting dressed for work. I watched the video online, she said. That was magnificent. It felt good to finally tell the truth. More than good. It was strategic brilliance. You positioned yourself as the victim who became the victor, discredited their origin story, and demonstrated your superior business success all in one speech. Is that what I did? Elena laughed. That's exactly what you did. And the best part is that everything you said was completely true. You didn't have to exaggerate or manipulate anything. What's the fallout going to be? For them? Significant. For you? Your phone is probably going to ring all day with new client inquiries. Elena was right. By 10 o'clock, my assistant had fielded 12 calls from potential clients who had either attended the gala or seen the coverage online. By noon, we had scheduled consultations with 3 Fortune 500 executives and 2 political candidates. But the real vindication came from sources I hadn't expected. Margaret Hartwell called personally to invite me to join the board of the Atlanta Legal Foundation. We need strategic thinkers like you, she said. People who understand how to build sustainable success. Marcus Webb stopped by my office unannounced. I had to come thank you in person, he said. Not just for the incredible work you did on my career pivot, but for what you said last night. About what specifically? About not limiting yourself to other people's small dreams. I've been thinking about that all morning. Marcus sat down across from my desk. David called me this morning. He wanted to know if I thought what you said was fair. What did you tell him? I told him that fair doesn't enter into it. I told him that you spent 6 years building his career, and he repaid you by stealing your money and replacing you with his law school girlfriend. Marcus shook his head. I also told him that if he had bothered to really look at what you were accomplishing for his professional development, he might have realized he was married to someone extraordinary. You said that. I said that and more. I told him that watching your business explode while his stagnates is exactly the kind of karma that makes me believe in cosmic justice. The broader social consequences for David and Sandra became clear over the following weeks. The Atlanta legal community is small and gossip travels fast. Within days, everyone knew the real story of their relationship and business partnership. Their client base started eroding almost immediately. 3 major clients terminated their relationships with Mitchell and Phillips, citing concerns about partnership integrity and strategic planning capabilities. Sandra's reputation took an even bigger hit. The story of her giving up partnership at Morrison to start a firm with her law school lover while using his wife's inheritance money painted her as someone who prioritized personal relationships over professional judgment. But the most satisfying consequence was watching their business struggle with exactly the challenges Elena had predicted. Without my strategic relationship-building skills, they couldn't generate sustainable growth beyond their initial momentum. Meanwhile, my business was becoming everything I had envisioned and more. 6 months after the gala, the Amara Johnson Strategic Group had expanded to 22 employees across 3 offices. We had worked with over 100 clients, generating more than $15 million in revenue for our engagements alone. But more importantly, we were changing lives. I had helped a whistleblower rebuild his career after exposing corporate fraud. I had guided a single mother through a transition from nonprofit work to corporate consulting that tripled her income. I had supported an immigrant entrepreneur in building the relationships necessary to scale his technology startup. The work was everything I had loved about supporting David's career, but amplified and directed toward people who genuinely appreciated what I brought to their success. The personal transformation was just as dramatic as the professional one. I had started dating again, though carefully and selectively. The first man I became serious about was Jonathan Harris, a documentary filmmaker who was brilliant, kind, and completely uninterested in having anyone manage his career for him. I love that you're ambitious, he said during one of our early conversations. I love that you built something incredible out of nothing. But I also love that you know who you are without your work. Jonathan had never known me as David's wife. He had only ever known me as Amara Johnson, successful entrepreneur and strategic consultant. To him, my confidence and business acumen weren't surprising developments, they were simply who I was. Dating someone who saw me as inherently valuable rather than potentially useful was a revelation. I had also reconnected with my family in ways I hadn't managed during my marriage. My mother and stepfather visited regularly, marveling at my transformation, but also admitting they had never understood why I had given up so much of myself for David. You were always the smartest one in any room, my mother said during one of their visits. I never understood why you were so determined to make yourself smaller for that man. I thought that's what love looked like. Love doesn't require you to disappear, sweetheart. Love should make you more yourself, not less. The most unexpected relationship development came from Rebecca Chin, who had become not just a close friend, but a trusted advisor and eventual business partner. You know what I love most about your success story? Rebecca said over dinner one evening. What? You didn't just beat David and Sandra at their own game. You changed the game entirely. Rebecca was right. Instead of competing with them in the legal services market, I had created an entirely new category of strategic consulting that made their business model look outdated. A year after the gala, David and Sandra's firm was struggling to maintain their original client base, while my company was being courted by acquisition offers from major consulting groups. But the ultimate validation came from an unexpected source. I was in my office late one evening, reviewing proposals for a new client, when my assistant buzzed me. "Ms. Johnson, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." "Who is it?" "David Mitchell." I considered having security escort him out, but curiosity won. "Send him in." David looked older than I remembered, worn down by a year of professional and social consequences. He was wearing an expensive suit that couldn't disguise the defeat in his posture. "Hello, Amara." "David. This is unexpected. I wanted to congratulate you on your success. And to apologize." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "You can sit if you want." David sat down and looked around my office, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the expensive furniture, the awards and recognition covering one wall. "This is incredible," he said quietly. "What you've built here." "Thank you. I also wanted to tell you that Sandra and I are separating." This was news, though not particularly surprising. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" "I'm sorry that anyone's relationship is ending. I know how painful that can be." David was quiet for a long moment. "She said something interesting when we were discussing the separation. She said that she realized she had fallen in love with the idea of me rather than with me." "What did she mean?" "She meant that she fell in love with the successful attorney whose career you had built, not with the person I actually am without that foundation." The irony was stunning. Sandra had destroyed my marriage to steal a man whose success was actually my creation, only to discover that without my strategic support, David wasn't as impressive as she had thought. She also said that she understood now why you were so devastated by our divorce. She said that losing someone you built your entire identity around would be terrifying. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. How so? Because it forced me to remember who I was before I became your wife. And to discover who I could become if I stopped limiting myself to your vision of my potential. David leaned forward. "Amara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Okay. Do you think there's any chance we could try again? Not romantically, necessarily, but as partners? Professional partners?" I stared at him, processing the magnitude of what he was asking. "You want me to give up my business to come work for you again?" "Not give up your business. Merge our businesses. Combine my legal expertise with your strategic consulting abilities." "David, do you understand what you're asking?" "I'm asking for a chance to correct the biggest mistake I ever made." I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. From my office, I could see the building where David and Sandra's firm was struggling to maintain relevance. "The biggest mistake you made wasn't divorcing me, David. The biggest mistake you made was never recognizing what I was contributing to your success until after I was gone. I recognize it now. Now, when your business is failing and you need my skills to save it." That's exactly what this is. You didn't come here to apologize or to recognize my worth. You came here because you finally understand that you can't succeed without me, and you want me to fix your problems again. I turned back to face him. "But here's what you don't understand, David. I don't need you anymore. I never needed you. I just thought I did because I had forgotten who I was capable of being on my own." David's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, disappointment, something that might have been grief. "So there's no chance?" "There's no chance of me ever again making myself smaller to accommodate someone else's limitations." After David left, I sat alone in my office and reflected on how much had changed since the night I discovered his betrayal. I had gone from being financially dependent on him to being worth more money than he would make in his lifetime. I had gone from having no professional identity to running one of the most successful consulting firms in the Southeast. But the most important change was internal. I had gone from measuring my worth by other people's approval to knowing my value regardless of what anyone else thought. The woman David had dismissed as not ambitious enough had built an empire. The woman he had replaced with someone better had become irreplaceable in her own right. The woman who had once defined herself entirely through her marriage was now someone who couldn't imagine giving up her independence for any relationship. I thought about the lottery ticket that had started this transformation. $2 spent in a moment of rebellion that had given me the resources to discover who I really was. But the money hadn't created my success. It had just given me the freedom to stop limiting myself to other people's expectations. The skills, the strategic thinking, the relationship-building abilities, those had always been mine. I had just been using them to build someone else's dream instead of my own. Now, looking out at the city where I had once felt so powerless and invisible, I felt grateful for everything that had happened. Grateful for David's betrayal, because it had forced me to remember my own strength. Grateful for Sandra's manipulation, because it had shown me what I was capable of when I stopped playing small. Grateful for the lottery win, because it had given me the resources to build something extraordinary. But mostly grateful for the journey from broken to powerful, from victim to victor, from David Mitchell's wife to Amara Johnson, CEO. Hey everyone, I hope this story has reminded you that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the setup for the best thing that could happen to you. I hope wherever you are right now, whatever challenges you're facing, you remember that your worth isn't determined by how other people treat you. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to let other people's limitations define their potential. Share this in the comments. Have you ever had someone underestimate you only to be proven wrong? I love hearing your stories of triumph and transformation. The universe really does keep receipts. And when it decides to settle accounts, the justice is always sweeter than you could have imagined. Sometimes karma doesn't just even the score. Sometimes it completely rewrites the game in your favor. And sometimes the person who tells you that you're not enough is actually giving you permission to become more than they could ever dream of being. Trust me on this one. I'm living proof that the best revenge is becoming someone they'll spend the rest of their lives wishing they hadn't lost. Thank you for listening to my story. I can't wait to share what happens next, because something tells me this is just the beginning of everything extraordinary that's coming. See you in the next one.